welcome to another fabulous episode of Thyroid Refresh TV, a podcast dedicated to helping you live a thyroid healthy lifestyle. We're so very glad to be back with you again. I'm Dana Bowman.
And I'm Ginny Mahar, and we are the dynamic duo behind Thyroid Refresh and Thyroid 30. And we're thrilled to be here today with Dr. Brooke Kalanick to talk about alcohol. Do alcohol and thyroid patients mix? We're so curious to find out. So welcome, Dr. Brooke. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Before we get started, I wanted to introduce those of you who haven't heard of Dr. Brooke, a little bit about her. She earned her doctorate in Naturopathic Medicine from Bastyr University. Very neat. Along with a master's in Acupuncture and Chinese Herbal Medicine. She studied and worked with leading functional medicine physicians, including Dr. Datis Kharrazian, Dr. David Brady, and Dr. Tori Hudson. With a background in pharmacy, Dr. Brooke is also well-versed in prescription medications and takes a balanced approach to using both conventional and alternative therapies. And her areas of expertise include female health, hypothyroidism, autoimmunity, and specialties in PCOS, Hashimoto's, menopause, and weight loss. All the things that thyroid patients here at Thyroid Refresh need to discuss and know about. So we're so glad to have you here with us again.
We've been really excited about this, Dr. Brooke. There's been this, I think alcohol has become kind of a hot topic right now. There's a lot of talk about alcohol and a lot of jokes going around about alcohol right now. Why? Because we're recording this during the COVID-19 pandemic. And, we've all seen the memes about drinking while you're teaching homeschool or making it to 10 a.m. before opening a bottle of wine or
My favorite is the one where there's a wine glass attached to someone's face and it's their mask, right? It's their mask instead. It's their wine glass. Right.
Or that quarantine rules are airport rules. You can drink at any hour of the day. Or my favorite is what's the difference between a martini and a quarantini? They're exactly the same, except you drink a quarantini at home alone. But all joking aside, stress levels are high right now. And I think just like there's a really high amount of stress eating going on, there's also a high amount of stress drinking going on. So, let's just put that out there and talk about how bad is this for thyroid patients. We're so curious to dive into this saucy topic with you, Dr. Brooke, because you've covered this at length. And in our experience, we talk to a lot of health experts, but it's been a little hard to find experts that really address the issue head on. It seems like there's a lot of talking around the issue, like nobody wants to be a party pooper maybe, or, but I feel like there's some really crucial information for us thyroid patients to understand. So let's dive in. What's the deal? Is it okay for us to have a drink?
Well, first I will say, I like to really be non-judgmental about any of it. I mean, especially right now, this is like a really hard time. It's awkward. It's weird. I don't think any of us expected this. Any of us were truly prepared for it, especially like the moms out there and all of our obligations that you had and potentially kids at home, ages. There's just stress around all of it. And many people are really stressed about finances. I mean, uncertainty is stressful for all of us, and who can even book a vacation or make a plan for months from now because we just don't know what's going to happen. So I posted when this whole thing started on my Instagram. It was literally a picture of me with a box of wine with a straw in it. And the joke was just that, again, we're talking about it, like you said, everybody's joking, all the memes and stuff. And I think that we'll talk about all the hormonal impact. So it may not be the best strategy for everybody, and there's some reasons why, and we can talk specifically about thyroid, but for some people, it can be part of your stress management tools. It can't be your only stress management tool, right? So if you're stressed out again at 10 a.m., we need to have something else we can do to get through that, right? So it's not to say that you can't have a glass of wine at all, ever. But again, if you're coping with that every single day, that's going to create some hormone fallout or some, nutrient deficiency or inflammation fallout for most of us, blood sugar problems. Again, some worse than others. And it kind of depends on where your hormones are at already. But again, if that's part of your strategy, okay, we still need to have maybe some mantras, something like tapping, a workout. We need to have like a wealth of stress management strategies, and they can be pretty individual for people. I like to give lots of strategies and encourage people to find some that work for them, because again, you need a lot of tools in your arsenal because it's a really high stress time. And it might be part of your stress management. It's just like when women over-exercise, right? Wine and exercise tend to be the two things that I see women use as stress management, but sometimes overdo because that's their go-to every time that they're stressed out. And those can be things that do cause some hormone fallout. So when we think of something that manages our stress, whether it's maybe eating a food that doesn't work so well for us, drinking, staying up late, watching TV, or maybe over exercising, those can all be things that in the moment relieve stress for us, yet create more stress on the back end. So they're a wash at best. And sometimes the fallout, like I know for me, the stress relief I get from a glass of wine is less than the stress increase I have the next day from not sleeping well because of it. So it helped for a few minutes, but the fallout the next day was probably a bigger stress. So we can talk about if there any part of that you want me to start with, because alcohol is one of those things that's sort of an interesting, maybe let's start with just how your body metabolizes it. I think women have heard, well, it's just calories. If I just deduct calories from somewhere else during the day, I can offset it with a glass of wine. And I think for a lot of women, if your metabolism is just working really, really well, you can think about it that way, that I can just offset this by something else and keeping my net intake over the whole. Most of us, if we have hormonal imbalances, if we're dealing with thyroid issues, a more sluggish metabolism, a lot of you guys probably have Hashimoto, so we've got more inflammation and immune activation, and any other hormone issues, right? I've got PCOS, so I've got insulin resistance and lower progesterone a lot of the time. And so when we look at those other hormone issues, we are not the ones who can just like take off 100 calories here and make it up with a glass of wine, because how it's metabolized and the other hormones that it impacts are going to be really obvious to us. So I think most of us see that, right? Most of us see how our sleep falls apart, how we're puffy the next day, how we're, having a harder time regulating our blood sugar and our appetite. So we've heard that you can just kind of swap it for some calories somewhere else. And we've also heard that, it's really, really bad for estrogen and that it just turns straight to fat. You hear all these things, right? And I think that when it comes to those sorts of things, it helps to just understand what your body does with this. So it might be, a good glass of wine can be really delicious and really enjoyable. Your body still thinks it's a toxin. Your body still is like, this is coming in. We need to prioritize dealing with that. And not to say like toxin, like you just did a bad thing, but as far as your liver is concerned, it wants to get rid of it pretty quickly. So when you take ethanol, alcohol in, you're going to metabolize it into acetaldehyde and acetate, or it becomes acetaldehyde, and then it goes into acetate, eventually to acetyl-CoA. So those steps in your biochemistry, when you get to acetyl-CoA, your body thinks, I've got lots of fuel around. It's one of the steps where you process your food and then it gets turned into energy inside the mitochondria of your cells. And so when your body sees that, it's like, I don't need to burn any extra fat. I don't need to metabolize this dinner that I just ate, or this, cheese plate that came with my glass of wine. And so that's where a lot of people initially are like, I just feel a little bit sluggish when I drink. You're not digesting very well. And you might feel like you've kind of got that, if you drink earlier in the evening, you eat dinner, and then you're getting ready to go to bed, and you might feel like your meal is still just kind of sitting there. And again, it's because your body just sort of was like, we'll just leave that here. We're going to go deal with the alcohol. And then that has some fallout as far as, did you turn any of your food into stored fuel for the evening, right? We can go throughout the night, typically. We should be able to go throughout the night without having to get up and eat, right? We can get cortisol and our stored glycogen, and we can utilize that over the course of the evening. But that doesn't happen very well when we're metabolizing alcohol and we're not metabolizing dinner and we're not making this stored fuel to get us through the night. So that's just one. We can talk a lot about how it disrupts your sleep, but that's kind of the first step. And so many people wake up in the night, they're hungry, they can't keep their blood sugar level throughout the night. So there's a couple things that just sort of immediately in terms of your metabolism can impact weight loss immediately. Also, who hasn't had a couple of glasses of wine and all of a sudden you really don't care what you eat, right? It's like, just I'm relaxed, your inhibitions are lowered, and you're like, let's just, have something that maybe doesn't work very well for me, and maybe we get into that place where we're not making really conscious decisions. We just don't really care. And then there's a lot of kind of hormone changes that flow from that. But maybe I'll take a pause there and see if that incited any questions or anything you want me to cover differently or better.
Well, that's a big one. And I think a great place to start, that domino effect is major. And I know, personally, that's one of my main motivations to moderate my drinking and just not drink most of the time is weight gain. It's like instant weight gain. I mean, I can just look at the bottle of wine and I put 3 pounds on, So yeah, I think that's a really good place to start, and just how the body processes that. I was curious about, because I've heard that you're really not metabolizing your calories. I've heard for like 24 hours after you have even one drink. Is that accurate?
Well, I think, again, all of that is based on what your hormone had the alcohol drinks per week and didn't gain weight. We have to really think about, how does that even apply to me? Like, where am I at? Where are my hormones at when we take any of those pieces of, information that we've read or that one of our favorite experts or gurus have put out there. So that's the first thing is, when we talk about hormone issues, if you've got low thyroid, if you've got inflammation, if you've already are dealing with low or high cortisol or blood sugar problems, all of those things are just going to impact you differently. And we all know that, right? We're the ones who just have to be a lot more careful about what we eat, and if we're getting enough sleep, and if we're recovering, and, if our digestion is working correctly, and we've got a healthy gut microbiome, and all of those pieces of the puzzle are so much more important if you've already got some sort of, hormone stuff going on. So there is sort of all that initial stuff we talked about. There's definitely, many people, like I said, we just don't regulate the way we're eating maybe the same. And part of that is just again, inhibitions are lower and maybe you don't care as much. You're not as concerned about in that moment. But also it really causes a lot of blood sugar up and downs for most of us. And that just makes our appetite goes up, our cravings go up. And then when it comes to sleep, waking, maybe I'll wrap that up and then we'll move on to sleep. Obviously, sleep is a huge piece of why some of us our metabolism is not working as well and why we might not be losing weight. Sleep is so important to your hormones, repair. It's one of the most important things we can do as far as resetting or supporting our metabolism. It tends to be one of the things none of us want to do. Most of us are still really rail against the idea of even investigating why we're not sleeping or getting ourselves to bed earlier, all the things we need to do. So just with the metabolism piece of it, so there's all those things we mentioned, and then also it causes a lot of inflammation for a lot of people, and inflammation is what I call the great hormone mess maker. I mean, at a minimum, it's going to make you gain some water weight just because you're holding on to more water as part of that inflammatory reaction, but also inflammation messes up every hormone. And I don't care if we're talking about cortisol or estrogen or thyroid, it's going to impact how well that hormone works. So let's say we've got a thyroid patient who's taking their medication, or you've got someone who's just making their own thyroid hormone. How well that thyroid hormone can work will be impacted if you've got it, it gets to the cell, it did what it was supposed to do. So let's say you made it, you converted it, you transported it to where it needed to go, but it can't have the proper effect. So it can't go into that fat cell or that muscle cell or that heart cell or your hair follicle cells or any of those things and turn it on and do its job if that cell is kind of mucked up with inflammation. So that's a really important one for metabolism, and everything else. But sleep is really that hormone reset button that we all need to have every single night. And the older we get and the more our cortisol is impacted, estrogen and progesterone have a really profound effect on our, neurotransmitters and our brain health. And so that can really impact how, deeply we fall asleep, how often we're waking. And this is well before even in perimenopausal times. So, many women start to notice in their 30s, their sleep is just not as good. The second half of their cycle, it's not as good right before their period or those first few days. And that just gets kind of turned on high as we come into our 40s or our mid 40s. So when it comes to sleep, alcohol does a number of things. So first of all, part of that wanting to eat other things that sound really yummy in the moment is alcohol will increase dopamine. And that when we get that dopamine hit, we want a little more. We start doing that pleasure-seeking behavior. So it's now I've got this nice, warm, fuzzy, happy feeling from the dopamine. And now I also really kind of want, chips or popcorn or something else that you might not normally have gravitated to. And maybe it's because it's more carbs, or maybe it's a food sensitivity, or maybe it's just like, I wouldn't have even normally have been hungry. So there's part of that, but dopamine is also, an upper. So it's also something that's stimulating, not something we really want right before we go to bed. Initially, alcohol is going to raise cortisol and adrenaline. So this is why, a lot of people feel like they get to bedtime after they've had some alcohol and they're like, now I'm just wide awake. Or they fall asleep, but then they can't stay asleep. And that part has to do a little bit more with a couple things. If it's fermented alcohol, like wine, for example, that can have a lot of histamines and tyramines. And those are these just amines, these normal things that are part of the fermentation process. They're going to also be in any other kind of fermented food like sauerkraut. But that can make some people, especially people dealing with histamine intolerance for some reason, wake up feeling hot or agitated, or, just anxious, or can't, stay asleep. The blood sugar thing is a big one too. So there's a lot of things that are, when you didn't store your meal properly, you've got these cortisol ups and downs, you've got this probably low blood sugar in the night where you probably releasing a little bit of adrenaline to get your blood sugar up, and then that makes you wake up and you're sometimes hot, you're sometimes anxious, you're sometimes hungry, but the sleep impact is huge, and that's like just what it does to cortisol and your blood sugar. I guess we did mention, dopamine. Alcohol will also affect just the normal sleep cycles and your normal circadian rhythm. So when it comes to the sleep cycles, when you have alcohol in your system, you tend to have less REM sleep, which is your more like active sleep. So sometimes people are like, well, isn't that a good thing? Wouldn't I just be in a deeper sleep? And most people notice that they do have some good deeper sleep, maybe for the first couple of hours of the night, and then they're having these blood sugar problems. But not getting into REM sleep is also, that's part of converting our like short-term to long-term memories. It's when we stimulate testosterone and growth hormone. So there's all of our sleep cycles, just like everything in our body. It was pretty wise the way it was designed and how we've evolved. All of those cycles are really important for us, and alcohol is going to disrupt it, just in so many ways. Also, when it comes to the morning, one of the most important things, we just talked off air about a guide that I have called the Stress Hormone Reset. So if you're somebody who's like waking up tired and maybe having a harder time winding down, thinking about all the things that have to happen throughout the day to have your normal circadian rhythm work properly. And part of it we have to really work with because we don't have normal light cues. Many of us get up, especially in the winter months, before the sun comes up, and many of us stay up well after. So if we're doing things like going to Target or the grocery store late at night or sitting on our devices, we're getting way too much of that full spectrum light at night, and many of us are not getting it right away in the morning. So that cue in the morning from light hitting part of your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. That's one of the big triggers in your brain of like, hey, send the signal to start making some cortisol and start my day and start my circadian rhythm. And alcohol really disrupts that part of your brain's ability to pick up on the light cues. So one of the things I always have women do if they're dealing with, low cortisol in the morning is like get full exposure to full spectrum light first thing in the morning. And that doesn't even work as well, even if you're doing it when we've had alcohol in our system as well. And then much like cortisol and melatonin are just kind of this opposite side of the coin when it comes to sleep. It's going to raise cortisol at bedtime or even in those early, parts of the night when you're waking up. It also directly decreases melatonin. So pretty much everything we need to have a good night's sleep is really disrupted by alcohol. So, again, people do it. You're going to have to think about like, how does this land for me? Is this something, I always put habits and food and lifestyle behaviors in a couple of buckets. The first one these are things that work really well for me. So this is like appropriate exercise, good sleep, vegetables, protein, water, eating like a starchy carbohydrate intake that really works for you to your level, whatever that may be, or maybe, maybe that's really low, maybe it's high, but like kind of knowing like these are the habits that really, really work for me. Of course, you want like the bulk of your life to be those things. And then there's going to be some things that don't work at all. Like for me, that's gluten. I just can't have it. That's not a food that works for me. The fallout is inflammation that lasts for days, so that's in that bucket and I don't ever do it. But then there's stuff in the middle. And this is where I think a lot of people find like maybe dairy or sugar or alcohol or gluten-free grains. It's like, I can have a little of that. I can't have it every day. But there's a way that I figured out to have this once in a while that doesn't totally derail me, yet makes me feel like I can, live my life. And so once you kind of have figured out, if alcohol fits for you in that piece of it. You just really want to look at, again, like, what are my other hormone issues? We haven't really even talked about estrogen, but there's going to be just certain people that it's not like alcohol. I don't like to say like, this is bad and, vegetables are good. It's like, there's just, how does this work for me? And can this work on occasion now? Are there things I could do, like, for example, you detoxify at best around like 5, 6 in the evening. So kind of happy hour was probably put there at just about the right time. That's going to be the time you tolerate it best. Drinking right before bed is going to mess up your sleep even worse. Mimosas and Bloody Marys in the morning, that's the time you're going to detoxify at the absolute worst. So your liver is just kind of getting going again for the day. And so we want to think about, is there times when this does work for me? Can I do it in a way that's a little bit healthier? Can I drink, if I'm going to drink wine, can I drink like a biodynamic, less, contaminants, so your liver has just less things to deal with? Most people find that impacts the way they feel the next day to some degree. Can you, take some B vitamins? Can you take some glutathione or some NAC and kind of support your detoxification, of this? Again, do it maybe a little bit earlier. And maybe there's going to be a time when you're in a healing phase where you're really trying to get your thyroid on track, or your cortisol on track, or your estrogen balance. It's just not going to work maybe at all then. So trying to find a way, if it's something you do enjoy. Some people don't care. Some people are like, yeah, I can just take it or leave it. But a lot of people do enjoy it, and maybe there's a time and a place for it.
It's funny that as we're talking, I'm thinking to myself, gosh, all these things, I don't really want any alcohol. Like, it just made me all these things that it really impacts and affects on your body and your sleep and your blood sugar and all the things that we like try to maintain. You kind of just forget that because the glass of wine sounds good. And so putting this all into perspective is making me go, oh, it doesn't really sound so fun anymore. But there are going to be the times that I do still drink. Maybe I'll just be a little bit more cognizant of all the things that are going to happen to me or not happen to me.
Well, and so many of us are already up against some challenges with our sleep, with weight loss, with mood, with blood sugar, made worse by our thyroid conditions, made more challenging for our bodies to do. And so I really appreciate the way that you laid that out of what are the things that are good for me to do as much as I want, the appropriate exercise and the vegetables and the, clean protein and things like that, versus what are the things that are okay that I should always avoid. And then what are the things that are okay for me to do sometimes? That's such a wonderful way of thinking about the power of our habits and what we engage in a habitual sense, in a daily, this is part of my regular routine. Mm-hmm. And it's always worth evaluating and reevaluating and coming back to those daily habits and choices, because they have such an impact on our health. I have a question.
Yeah, and they change, right? We might have like a time when this worked fine. Like, I know I could drink more in my 20s than I ever could now. And that's the thing with women's hormones. They're a moving target. And when you learn to kind of understand your cues, like I talk a lot about ACEs, your appetite, cravings, energy, sleep. I've got another acronym for your female hormones. But when you kind of like learn those cues, you take what you've been doing with diet, exercise, and lifestyle, and then you reevaluate it. You're like, that was working, and now all of a sudden I'm feeling like I need to have 4 meals a day instead of 3 because I've been under all this stress. And so just knowing whatever was, but I think as women, especially like weight loss is a great example. As soon as we're like in a place where like, I think I want to, drop a few pounds, we immediately want to go back to something we, like the last time I lost weight, I did this program and I did this diet, and that might've been 10 years ago. And it's just a whole different ball game now. And I think, to your point about the putting them in those different buckets, women especially have had just like such a long negative history with dieting. And so we tend to think of like sugar bad, vegetable good, alcohol bad, can of tuna fish good, like those things we've all done for many, many years. And I think that when we do that, what we still hear is like, if I eat the vegetables, I'm good. If I drink the alcohol or I have the cake, I'm bad. And so it just getting away from that helps us just make a little bit more like rational, loving self-care kind of decisions instead of, well, that was a bad thing to do, or, I'm bad if I did it.
It's so important. That's such a good point. thinking about all the reasons not to drink, and you mentioned like happy hour is one of the better times of day to drink. How do we make, if we're going to have a drink, are there certain, alcohol choices that are better than others? And I guess this is a two-part question. I'm also curious about some of the purported health benefits of drinking. Have we debunked all of those? I know you mentioned, it can be a stress reliever when done in moderation. So yeah, I guess, can we talk about those two things?
Yes. I mean, I think the hardest thing for your liver is going to be alcohol plus sugar. It just is. Like, that's just like a metabolic tough thing. It's kind of like a big fat and carb dose. Like I always talk about the cheesecake effect. Like that's going to be harder for you than like a gummy bear, right? Because it's just sugar plus fat. It's just harder. It's just more work and more, it's a little bit confusing to your metabolism. Like I've got so much fuel and it requires different enzymes. And so we tend to do a little bit better when we don't do those really tough combos. So alcohol and sugar is a tough combo. So if you can obviously do something that is lower in sugar, that's going to be a big one. I have found both myself personally and a lot of my patients that if they have switched to not only like biodynamic and lower additive wines, but European wines, basically any wine that wasn't from the US. We add a lot of stuff to wine. There's companies like Dry Farm Wines that curate these, but they're just wines that are from other places. They've done the testing, but it tends to be, European wines, Australian wines, they tend to just not have as much stuff in them. And so some people do find that makes a really big difference. So, lower sugar drinks and also less contaminants in it, because it's just more stuff for your liver to deal with. Now, I will say to that, if you're someone who is like, I just want to have a margarita once a week, or I want to have a margarita 2 different nights a week, and that's the only thing that I want to drink, and I don't eat a lot of other sugar, I've got all these other things in place, don't drink a glass of wine that you don't like just to be able to do it, right? So sometimes you have to think about, that's really just the one thing that I want, and on occasion, just have the thing that you want. Are you in a place where you can do that at all? And B, can you account for like the fact that that's the only sugar you have all week, or that's like, you know what I mean? Like you're getting so many other things, right? So I would just caution us to do something that we don't enjoy just because that was the only one that they said that was okay. So that's one thing. Again, really thinking about where your hormones are at. Are you in a place where you can fit this in? Again, so I always talk about the hormone hierarchy, and thyroid's at the top. So if you're dealing with thyroid stuff, this might be really hard for you, and working your way kind of on down through those other hormone issues. So thinking about that, again, just like how it fits for you right now, is always to me more important than what a nutrition research study says, well, there's resveratrol in there, so that's good. We want to remember a lot of that research was done on men. A lot of that research was done on fit men. So compare an athletic fit man to a woman with hormone issues. Like that's not even the same ball game, right? So remembering some of the benefits we see, a lot of that has not, bared out as well for women. And part of that is because we have a lot more complex, hormonal issues going on. We don't tend to study perimenopausal women as well because their hormones are all over the place and their thyroid's all over the place, and it's harder to control for all those things when it comes to some of the nutrition research. So think about that too. Many of the like quote unquote benefits apply more to men. But again, can you fit this in your life in a way that doesn't derail you if it's something you still enjoy? And then I would say all of the other hormones we talked about are really important. And then estrogen is this kind of own little pocket of trouble, both for men and women. I mean, men who drink too much are going to have estrogen metabolism issues too. Men have estrogen, it leads to metabolic syndrome and, kind of a component of a lot of those. When it comes to estrogen and women, spurred up like aromatase. So we're going to be turning testosterone into estrogen. That's going to be spurred by blood sugar issues. It's going to be spurred by alcohol consumption. And some of that goes back to, again, just how we metabolize alcohol. So we're going to get a little bit more like flow into our detoxification detoxification pathways and metabolism that could be a fallout for women. So that could be, that creates those estrogen dominant symptoms, breast tenderness, heavier periods, shorter periods, could be like hot flashes and night sweats, things like that. And there is certainly an increased risk we've demonstrated with breast cancer. And part of that probably has to do with its impact on raising some of these metabolites. And alcohol and estrogen are going to share some common pathway when it comes to detoxification. And again, alcohol takes priority as far as your body's concerned.
I wanted to ask about gut health and how alcohol affects the gut flora, because that's a really big thing for me. I'm really trying to work on getting my gut health happy and flourishing and all of that stuff. And then I start thinking, oh, the alcohol, boy, that's probably not so great for it. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's, when you have these interviews and or write these blog posts or whatever, you talk about this, it's like, it's just not all great news, is it? Right? It's really just kind of a bummer head to toe. So it definitely has a negative impact on our gut microbiome. It can cause a lot of irritation and hyperacidity for some people. So upper GI can impact your stomach acid secretion. And I think this tends to be worse with those of us dealing with histamine imbalances or histamine intolerance. If you're anybody, and I can talk about, I don't know if your audience knows what that is, but, and that often is even stemming from a predisposing, gut issue. And that, of course, is going to impact all of your hormones, definitely thyroid, definitely estrogen. With this kind of increased cortisol and the lack of sleep, that is something that also makes it very hard for your leaky gut to heal, for your microbiome to really flourish. And so it really doesn't do great service to our gut. So if you want to think about some things, you can do. So when you think about okay, this is something I want to keep in my life on occasion. I've got some of these other pieces in place. I'm not really a highly estrogenic female. I'm not dealing with some of those symptoms. We definitely want to be taking a probiotic, something like NAC or glutathione. Glutathione, especially if you're someone with Hashimoto's, you'll hear a lot from women with Hashimoto's that they're like, all of a sudden, I just can't tolerate alcohol at all. I have one drink and it feels like I had a bottle of tequila, or I have half a glass of wine. And sometimes I have one glass of wine, sometimes I have three, and I can never tell how it's going to impact me. And that has a lot to do with oxidative stress and your glutathione system. So that's something you might want to think about supporting just as someone with autoimmunity and Hashimoto's, but definitely if you're going to have alcohol. So you can do that with NAC, which is a little bit less expensive, or you can do something like a liquid or liposomal glutathione that tends to work really well. Definitely take a probiotic. Definitely take B vitamins, B1 and B6. So thiamine and B6 tend to be depleted. B vitamins in general, but those are probably the two that are, the most impacted. And those are really, if you're deficient on B6, none of your hormones are going to get metabolized, right? So that's a really, really, important one, especially if you're someone who has wine or alcohol a couple times a week. So maybe putting some of those pieces into play. Definitely some zinc, that's going to help with a lot of things. But yeah, always a good idea to throw in a probiotic. Now, if you're somebody who takes probiotics and you get bloated or you're having some sort of problem, then you probably definitely want to see a functional medicine practitioner to figure out what's going on in your gut. But that's probably the only reason not to take a probiotic, is if it's making you, more bloated or having more digestive symptoms. It's a good indicator that something else is going on. But yeah, it's not doing our gut flora any favors, that's for sure.
Now I wish I wouldn't have asked that one.
I know, I'm telling you, there's no good news in this one.
Well, I just want to throw in a little practical tip. I know so much of what you're talking about I've experienced, right down to the feeling like I had half a glass of wine. Why do I feel like I drank the whole bottle? Just, It really doesn't agree with my body that much anymore. So I've just naturally, moved away from it more and more. And as, I've come into my 40s. But one thing that has really helped me is mocktails. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It's not like you have to get the cocktail shaker out. I do one that I call the Jolly Rancher, because it tastes just like a watermelon Jolly Rancher. It's watermelon Waterloo, like bubble water, and maybe 3 parts of that and 1 part pomegranate juice. Juice isn't something I drink, as a habit, but when I'm like, I'm trying to avoid having a glass of wine or something, when I'm making dinner, it's like, let's have a mocktail. My husband and I do this all the time. And it's just nice to have something instead of just feeling totally deprived. So there's lots of simple little concoctions you can make with club soda or any kind of mineral water that, just make it a little easier. And I think one more just practical tip is one thing I've tried is really diluting things. So say I'm at a party and I want to have a glass of wine, I might order like a white wine spritzer where you're drinking half a glass of white wine with club soda added to that. So you still get, the pleasure of a drink and a little bit of alcohol, but just less. You're lessening the consumption. So little tricks like that, I think can be helpful in helping us, set ourselves up to succeed at making healthy choices around alcohol.
Yeah, and I will say if you're somebody who likes cocktails, doing what it seems like fizzy water, carbonated water is kind of soda water, solving a lot of these problems, but doing soda and bitters because it's not sweet. And so if you're somebody who's like, but I want like a martini, or I want like, something that doesn't have a lot of sugar in it, doing like lime and bitters in soda water really does taste like something. I mean, in most, bourbon-based cocktails are going to have bitters in them. So, and there's tons of flavors of bitters. You can get chocolate bitters and orange and rhubarb. And, my husband loves cocktails, so we have a lot of that stuff. And so that, of course, like when I was pregnant, like that's what I did. And I was like, I just really love that. And it felt like, with a little bit of lime, it just really felt fine. And I will say another product that I really love if you're trying to not drink wine is a company called Sound, and they make a carbonated tea, and they've got a rose one and a green tea one and the chamomile one. It's got chamomile, vanilla, the carbonated water, and that's it. There's not even any sweetener in there, but the vanilla and the chamomile are kind of sweet. Put it in a wine glass, put it in a nice glass. And my patients love this wine because they're like, it really just tastes like a little bit of champagne or maybe even like a really light beer. And that's one that they're like, don't even miss it because it doesn't taste anything like, some of the, like,
try that for sure.
Oh, it sounds great.
Yeah, that's a good one. And they have that in our grocery store, but you can get that online if they don't carry it at your store.
Awesome.
Okay, Sound. All right.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Brooke, for sharing your wisdom and expertise with us on this big topic. It's always a big topic. It feels like an especially big topic right now, and always good to arm ourselves with knowledge and information so that we can make the best choices for our health. Are there maybe a few main takeaways you have that you really want to drive home for the listeners today?
Yeah, I would say, like I said, this was great news if you're someone who enjoys drinking alcohol. So, you can't unknow it now. So it is what it is. And I always say that, Sarah, my co-author and my podcast, the Sarah and Dr. Brooke Show, are Sarah Fregoso is my co-host and my co-author. And when we put together like our book and our work, we talk about 5 pillars. And there's the first one is finding and committing to what works for you. So some of us still have to figure that out, right? We might be playing with, foods that work or don't work, or maybe where does alcohol fit in? So part of that journey for women is like finding what works for you. But when you get to it, so let's say you're someone who's like, I just can't sleep when I drink. Like, this is just the reality of it. I've tried some other things. When I have alcohol, my sleep is a mess. It impacts me so much the next day. This is something that just doesn't work for me. So that second step of it is committing to what works for you. And I always say, like, we'll use gluten as an example. 2 women can go gluten-free. And one is like, I feel so empowered and so grateful that I have figured out that there's this food that doesn't work for me, and it makes my hormones and my inflammation and all this stuff go crazy. And if I can avoid that, I have my life back, and and that makes her feel great. And then you can have another woman who all her symptoms improve, and she physically feels better from not having this food, but she's mentally just feels restricted and terrible and hates every living second of it. And it really comes down to, should that woman go back on this food? Probably not. But what a way to commit to that doesn't feel bad. How can she change her perspective around that and be more like the first woman who feels they're still not eating the food. They still have the same annoying things that they have to, try to find something to eat in an airport when everything's got gluten in it or something like that, or they're at a party and they can't have this dessert, this food or whatever. So there's still those same challenges, but it's truly kind of perspective about it. So if that's you with alcohol, look at what is it that you feel? Do you feel restricted? Do you feel like I hate being told what to do? So tell me I can't have a glass of wine and I'm immediately going to rail against that.
Me too, absolutely.
I have to work on that of why do I feel that way? Is there another way to find freedom in this situation? That's not the freedom to just eat whatever or do whatever I want. So thinking about, again, like knowing what works for you, being with that knowledge comes great power, but it also comes great responsibility. I think it's really hard for us to wake up the next day and feel yucky from something we did knowing it was going to have that fallout. And that makes us, ourselves up. So it's just, sometimes that's a real process. Again, some women are like, great, I know that, done, on to the next thing. And other women are like, I really have to do a little bit of work to feel okay about that, because I think if it's something you love and you take it out, but you're super miserable, that's stressful too. So if it's something that really doesn't work for you, finding your way to, acknowledge and commit to what works for you in a healthy way. Because if you don't, you're either going to white knuckle it and hate every second, or you're not going to be able to stick with it.
Well put. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Our bodies give us so much feedback, don't they? And when we attune our ear to listen to the feedback that our bodies give us, then we're more empowered to honor our bodies and give them more of what they need, and maybe even get to a point where we can indulge in more of the things we used to be able to enjoy, like a glass of wine or whatever it is. So very wonderful to have this knowledge from you, and we really appreciate you being here with us today, Dr. Brooke.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
For our listeners, you can find Dr. Brooke at her website, betterbydrabrooke.com. And in our show notes, we will put the link to that freebie you mentioned earlier. And there's a free stress hormone reset. So we will put the links to that in the show notes. Thank you all for joining us for another episode of Thyroid Refresh TV, where we give you the inspiration and information you need to live thyroid healthy. To receive your free Thyroid Thrivers grocery guide, you can visit us at thyroidrefresh.com. And to learn more about Thyroid 30, our revolutionary 30-day wellness game, go to thyroidrefresh.com/thyroid30. You do have the power to heal, and we have the tools.
And if you've enjoyed this podcast and would like to help us continue inspiring and empowering thyroid patients worldwide, please leave us a review on iTunes. It would make our day. And because you are what makes this community the amazing resource that it is, and we appreciate you so very much and your listenership. We're Dana and Jenny, wishing you the best of health. See you next time.
See you next time.